Afternoon, it's the 30th of June 2024. Our next speaker is Mr. Mike Jackson. He's from Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. They raised a lot of money for miners during miners' strike, astronomical amount. I've heard him speak before. Very inspirational guy and very accomplished speaker. So he too got a well-earned round of applause, so listen to this.
Thank you. It's a great honour always to speak to former mining communities, so thank you for the invitation. There's been a lot on for us this year, 40th anniversary of the miners' strike. It's also London Pride Day today. I'm afraid good. But I kind of fell out with how corporate London Pride has become over the last few years. The last time I went was about 4 years ago, after I'd held a placard outside by the Barclays Bank bus. They were the main corporate sponsors of Pride. And I did what's it called? I kind of took a placard, a homemade placard, stood in front of their bus and just said, Barclays Bank Apartheid 1970 to 1984, lest we forget. And at the end of that particular Pride, I also saw a BAE Systems banner. So it seems like they have absolutely no ethical bottom line. They'll accept corporate sponsorship from almost anybody. But there you go. It's still important that Pride happens. And the great thing is, Pride is happening in many other places rather than just London. In fact, my heterosexual niece is organising the first ever Pride in Clitheroe in Lancashire. So that's great. In Mansfield, yay! Brilliant. Doncaster. Brilliant. Yeah, well, I'm going to the Doncaster one. Somebody said earlier on that if the strike happened again tomorrow, we'd join it, and that's absolutely true. I have never ever felt that we were wrong in supporting the mining communities, and I still feel absolutely that we did exactly what was right. And I still think that Arthur Scargill is the best trade union that has ever been in British Labour history. So, solidarity to Arthur. Just going to talk about what happened to me 50 years ago, when I came out as a 19-year-old gay man. I struggled to understand and reconcile my sexuality as a working class adolescent in the late 60s, early 70s. I grew up in what was then a Lancashire mill town called Accrington, and please don't say Stanley. There was one remaining coal mine, Skatelift Pit. It closed in 1960, but I remember seeing and hearing the colliers. People were still wearing clogs in those days, and it sounded like there was a load of horses walking down the street. Since being a kid, I knew I was homosexual. The term gay hadn't yet been invented. This is the 1960s. And everyone and everything around me told me that to be a homosexual was a very, very bad thing. There might have been pockets of liberal attitudes in places like Chelsea and Hampstead in that London, but Accrington was a long way from London, about 20 to 30 years. It wasn't all gloom though. I knew what I wanted to do as a living early on. I wanted to study and work in horticulture, a skilled manual trade. I left home at 16 to work in the industry. And by 19, I was lucky enough to become a student at Kew Gardens in that London. I saw a small advert in Time Out magazine placed by a gay switchboard, which was a 24/7 telephone support service for gay people. It was the only one in the world. Still firmly in the closet, I sought a phone box where it was unlikely that any of my fellow students might pass by. Switchboard told me something that no one had ever told me, that it was okay to be gay. I disagreed, of course. They told me that the only thing I was suffering from was homophobia. I thought, oh my God, don't say I've got that as well as homosexuality. Those switchboard volunteers had a lot of patience. They explained what homophobia was. It took several phone calls before it sunk in, but when it did, I changed from being a sullen, depressed teenager into this joyous and furious 19-year-old. Joyous because I could have sex without feeling guilty. Furious that I'd suffered those years of depression, including those younger teenage years. At least I got there in my final teenage year. Bear in mind, though, that the age of consent then was still unequal for us. So if I had sex, me being 19, with anyone who was 21 years or older, they were committing a criminal offence. I tried as frequently as I could to aid and abet 21-year-olds in committing crimes together. As I learned more and more about homophobia and gay liberation, I began to realise that there were parallels to be drawn. The women's liberation movement were early, significant allies of the early gay liberation movement, and I'm now talking about 1969-72. I learned from these women and was supported and encouraged by them. I started to think about black people and black oppression and their liberation, about people living with disabilities and so on. I learned that these things would have to be continually considered and confronted for the rest of my life. It never stops. But the goal is worth it, and it's our duty. In 1984, we unconditionally supported the striking miners. We would tackle any homophobia case by case, as we were doing in our daily lives as young activists. But in fact, there was none to challenge, because by the time that we arrived in that Welsh village, the men had thought it through, undoubtedly cajoled by the mothers and wives. The standing ovation we received walking into that miners' welfare hall was the proudest and most unexpected moment of our lives. We returned to London on fire, more committed than ever to support our new friends in the mining community. We were with them the weekend that the return to work was announced. The NUM subsequently famously supported the gay rights motion at the TU conference in 1985. The trade union movement went on to develop comprehensive employment rights for the LGBT community. 15 years later, a Labour government used these as the foundations to bring in statutory rights for LGBT people in the early 2000s. Despite us living in a country that has the most restrictive anti-trade union laws in Europe, and I'll say that again, the most restrictive anti-trade union laws in Europe, I have no doubt that the unions are still the most powerful agencies for improvement for our class across the globe. Our continuous goal must be to break down every barrier that blocks the pathway to solidarity. Barriers of racism, sexism, transphobia, and things to come that we haven't even realised at this moment in time. We mustn't be lured into diversionary traps put up like the likes of Farage, pointing the fingers of hate at migrants when it is he who is our class enemy. We have only one enemy, the global capitalist class and the lackeys that do their bidding. It is they who are stealing the wealth from our pockets, who are the cause of widespread child poverty, who want to make profits in our NHS. We're all a lot older now, but the fire burns in our bellies today as much as yesterday. Thanks, comrades. Solidarity.
Thank you, Mike. I think that was very inspirational. And we've got to remember, Mike and his comrades supported the miners, especially in Wales. I think if you've all seen the film Pride, you'll understand. And the miners supported Mike and his comrades when they had the march, the first Gay Pride march. Well, the first Gay Pride march after the strike, when the Welsh were at the front of that march. Thank you, Mike.